At 22:14 hours on March 14, 1967, Captain James Henderson sat in the pilot's seat of a UH-1C Huey gunship at 1,500 feet above the Mekong Delta, watching his co-pilot point toward a river crossing 800 yards to the east. The UH-1C was a transport helicopter modified for armed escort. The conversion added two M134 minigun pods on external pylons, each pod containing one 6-barrel rotary machine gun capable of firing 4,000 rounds per minute. The gunship also carried two rocket pods, each pod holding 7 2.75-inch folding-fin aerial rockets with high explosive warheads. Total armament: 2 miniguns, 14 rockets, and 8,000 rounds of 7.62mm ammunition. Viet Cong forces called armed helicopters con trung, insects. They dismissed them as transport helicopters with light weapons. VC propaganda claimed helicopters couldn't maneuver effectively, couldn't see at night, couldn't sustain fire long enough to matter. The propaganda emphasized that helicopters were vulnerable, slow-moving targets that VC gunners could shoot down with AK-47s and heavy machine guns. Henderson didn't care about propaganda. He cared about the thermal signature his co-pilot had spotted on the starlight scope, heat blooms indicating large numbers of personnel moving near the river. His co-pilot, First Lieutenant Michael Torres, adjusted the scope and confirmed. "Pilot, we have multiple groups crossing the river. Estimate 100-plus individuals. Grid Whiskey Delta 6847. Appears to be a battalion-strength element." Henderson checked the map. The location was 12 miles inside the Mekong Delta, 3 miles from the nearest Allied position. The river was the Song Travaing, a tributary that connected to larger waterways leading deeper into VC-controlled territory. A battalion crossing at night meant a major operation, either reinforcement movement or preparation for an attack. Henderson radioed his command post, call sign Sabre. "Sabre, Warhorse 26, we have visual on large enemy force crossing river at Whiskey Delta 6847. Request permission to engage." Sabre responded immediately. "Warhorse 26, you are cleared hot. Engage at discretion. Be advised, no friendly forces within 5 clicks of that position." Henderson acknowledged and briefed Torres. "We're going in. I'll set up an orbit over the crossing site. You run the weapons. Start with rockets on the near bank, break up the groups waiting to cross, then miniguns on personnel in the water." Torres armed the weapon systems. The rocket pods showed ready status. The minigun pods showed 4,000 rounds loaded per gun, 8,000 rounds total. Henderson had fuel for 3 hours on station, ammunition for approximately 4 minutes of sustained minigun fire, longer if he fired in controlled bursts instead of continuous streams. At 22:17 hours, Henderson established a clockwise orbit 600 yards from the river crossing. The starlight scope showed the tactical picture clearly. Approximately 150 VC personnel on the near bank preparing to cross, another 100 already in the water, swimming or using boats, perhaps 50 on the far bank regrouping after crossing. Total count, 300 minimum. The river was 80 yards wide at the crossing point. The water was moving slowly, maybe 2 knots current. The VC were crossing in groups of 10 to 15 using small boats and individual swimming with equipment held above water. The crossing was organized and disciplined, characteristic of regular VC or NVA units, not local guerrillas. Henderson positioned the helicopter for the first rocket attack. "Torres, engage the near bank. Maximum dispersion. I want those groups broken up before they enter the water." Torres aligned the rocket sight and fired. The first rocket left the pod with a whoosh and bright flash. It covered 600 yards in 2 seconds and exploded on the riverbank 15 feet from a group of VC personnel. The explosion killed or wounded at least 8 individuals. The surviving personnel scattered. Torres fired the remaining 13 rockets in rapid sequence, 1 rocket every 2 seconds. Each rocket exploded on or near the riverbank. Some hit groups of personnel directly, others exploded in areas where VC were gathered waiting to cross. The explosions created chaos. Personnel ran in multiple directions, some dove into the water, some fled back into the tree line. The organized crossing became a panicked scramble. Henderson watched the effect. "Good hits. I count at least 30 down on the near bank. The rest are scattering. Shift to minigun. Engage personnel in the water." Torres switched to the minigun system. He selected the right minigun pod and centered the sight on a group of VC swimming across the river. He pressed the trigger. The M134 minigun fired at 4,000 rounds per minute, 66 rounds per second. The gun's 6 barrels rotated at high speed, each barrel firing once per rotation. The rate of fire was so high that individual shots blurred into a continuous sound, a buzzsaw ripping through the air. Tracers every 5th round created a solid stream of light connecting the helicopter to the target. Torres fired a 3-second burst, 200 rounds. The bullets hit the water in a line 40 feet long. Every VC in that line was hit by multiple rounds. Bodies went limp and floated downstream. Blood spread in the water. Torres shifted to another group, another 3-second burst, another 200 rounds, more bodies in the water. Henderson maintained the orbit and monitored fuel and ammunition. The miniguns were expending ammunition at a high rate. 200 rounds per 3-second burst meant 4,000 rounds would last for approximately 60 seconds of trigger time. He needed Torres to fire in short bursts and maximize effectiveness per round. At 22:21 hours, 4 minutes into the engagement, Torres had fired approximately 1,200 rounds from the right minigun. The river crossing had been disrupted but not stopped. VC personnel were still attempting to cross. Groups on the near bank were entering the water despite casualties. The far bank had approximately 80 individuals who had successfully crossed before the attack began. Henderson made a tactical decision. "Torres, we need to seal both ends. Engage the far bank with left minigun. Kill everyone who already crossed. Then we'll work back through the swimmers." Torres switched to the left minigun pod and engaged the VC personnel on the far bank. The range was longer, 700 yards instead of 600, but still within effective minigun range. He fired sustained bursts into the groups clustered on the riverbank. The 7.62 millimeter rounds had enough energy at 700 yards to kill effectively. Bodies dropped, survivors scattered into the tree line. At 22:24 hours, VC forces on the ground began returning fire. Muzzle flashes appeared from multiple positions, AK-47s and heavier weapons firing at the helicopter. Tracers arced upward. Most rounds fell short. 600 yards was long range for small arms, and shooting at a moving helicopter at night made accurate fire nearly impossible. But the volume of fire was increasing. Henderson counted at least 20 weapons firing. Henderson adjusted altitude to 1,800 feet, adding margin above small arms' effective range. The altitude reduced weapon accuracy but provided safety. Torres compensated by firing longer bursts to maintain effectiveness. The VC crossing attempt continued despite casualties. Personnel on the near bank kept entering the water. The tactical calculation was clear. They believed they could accept casualties and still get enough personnel across to accomplish their mission. They were gambling that the helicopter would run out of ammunition before they ran out of personnel. Henderson understood the calculation. He checked ammunition. Right minigun, 2,800 rounds remaining. Left minigun, 3,600 rounds remaining. Total, 6,400 rounds. At current expenditure rate, approximately 400 rounds per minute, he had 16 minutes of ammunition remaining. He had fuel for nearly 3 hours. Ammunition was the limiting factor. Henderson radioed Sabre. "Sabre, Warhorse 26, we are engaging large enemy force at the river crossing. Estimate 300+ enemy personnel. We've inflicted heavy casualties, but they're still attempting to cross. Request additional gunships if available." Sabre responded, "Warhorse 26, negative on additional gunships. All other aircraft committed to operations. You are the only asset available. Continue engagement as long as ammunition permits." Henderson acknowledged. He was alone. One helicopter against what appeared to be an entire VC battalion. He would need to maximize every round remaining. At 22:27 hours, Henderson changed tactics. Instead of engaging groups randomly, he would systematically eliminate personnel in sequence, starting with those farthest across the river and working backward. This would prevent anyone from reaching the far bank, while ensuring those still on the near bank watched everyone ahead of them die. Torres executed the new pattern. He engaged swimmers who were 3/4 across, only 20 yards from the far bank. Short bursts killed them. Then swimmers who were halfway across. Then swimmers just leaving the near bank. The psychological effect was devastating. VC personnel watched others die just yards from safety. The crossing slowed as individuals hesitated before entering the water. Henderson maintained steady orbit and called targets. "Group of 8 entering water from near bank. Engage." Torres fired. The group died before reaching deep water. 3 swimmers at midpoint. Engage." Torres fired. 3 bodies floated downstream. 2 individuals on far bank attempting to set up heavy machine gun. Priority target. Torres engaged with extended burst. The machine gun crew died before completing setup. At 22:32 hours, 18 minutes into the engagement, the VC crossing attempt had nearly stopped. Approximately 40 personnel remained on the near bank. Another 15 were in the water at various points. The far bank had perhaps 10 survivors from earlier crossings who had hidden in the tree line. Total remaining, 65 individuals. Henderson estimated casualties inflicted. He had observed at least 180 bodies in the water or on the riverbanks. Many more had been wounded and swam or crawled away. Total casualties, 200+. Confirmed, possibly 250 to 300, including wounded who might die later. But the remaining 65 VC were still attempting to complete their mission. Groups of 3 to 4 individuals were entering the water, spacing themselves to reduce casualties from each minigun burst. The tactical adaptation showed discipline. These were experienced soldiers, not guerrillas. Henderson checked ammunition. Right minigun, 1,200 rounds. Left minigun, 2,400 rounds. Total, 3,600 rounds. 9 minutes of ammunition at current rate. He made another tactical decision. "Torres, we're going to force them to mass up, then kill them all at once. Cease fire on the near bank. Let them think we're out of ammunition. When they gather to cross in large groups, we'll hit them with sustained fire." Torres ceased fire. The helicopter continued orbiting but didn't shoot. VC personnel on the near bank noticed. After 2 minutes, they began gathering in larger groups, apparently believing the helicopter had exhausted ammunition and was leaving. A group of 25 individuals clustered at the water's edge preparing to cross simultaneously. Henderson waited until the group entered the water. "Torres, engage now. Sustained fire. Kill them all." Torres fired both miniguns simultaneously, 8,000 rounds per minute combined rate of fire. The two streams of tracers converged on the group in the water. The miniguns fired for 6 seconds, 800 rounds total. Every individual in the group was hit by multiple rounds. The water turned red. Bodies floated everywhere. The remaining VC personnel on the near bank, approximately 15 individuals, broke and ran. They fled into the jungle away from the river. Henderson pursued. "Torres, engage the runners. Don't let anyone escape." Torres tracked the fleeing personnel with the starlight scope and engaged with short bursts. The individuals were running through open ground before reaching the tree line, easy targets. Torres killed 12. 3 reached the jungle and disappeared. At 22:37 hours, Henderson surveyed the battlefield. The river crossing site was a slaughter. Bodies floated in the water, drifting downstream with the current. Bodies lay on both riverbanks. Blood spread across the water surface in large patches, visible even without the starlight scope. No VC personnel were visible. The crossing had been completely stopped. Henderson radioed Sabre. "Sabre, Warhorse 26, river crossing has been neutralized. Estimate 200+ enemy KIA confirmed. Crossing site is secure. We have ammunition remaining and fuel for continued operations. Request tasking." Sabre responded, "Warhorse 26, outstanding work. Hold position and monitor. Intelligence indicates additional enemy forces may be moving toward that crossing point. Engage any additional forces that appear." Henderson acknowledged and established a holding pattern 1,000 yards from the crossing site. He climbed to 2,500 feet to conserve fuel and maintain observation. Torres monitored the starlight scope for any movement. At 22:44 hours, 7 minutes after the initial crossing was stopped, Torres detected new movement. "Pilot, I'm seeing thermal signatures approaching the crossing site from the west, multiple groups. Estimate 50+ individuals." Henderson examined the scope. A second VC element was approaching the river, probably reinforcements or a follow-on unit that hadn't received word about the first group's destruction. The new element was moving in tactical formation, small groups spaced 30-40 yards apart. They were 400 yards from the river. Henderson descended to 1,500 feet and positioned for engagement. "Torres will hit them before they reach the river. Engage with miniguns at maximum range. I want them stopped in the open ground." Torres engaged at 800 yards, long range for miniguns but effective enough. He fired the right minigun in sustained bursts, walking fire across the advancing groups. Bodies dropped. The advancing element stopped and took cover in sparse vegetation. VC forces returned fire, more weapons than before, at least 30 AK-47s and several heavy machine guns. The volume of fire was intense. Tracers filled the air. Several rounds hit Henderson's helicopter, impacts on the fuselage and tail boom. No critical systems damaged yet. Henderson climbed to 2,000 feet and continued engaging. Torres fired both miniguns, suppressing the VC positions and killing personnel who exposed themselves to shoot. The engagement became a sustained firefight. Helicopters circling above, VC pinned in open ground below, both sides exchanging fire. At 22:51 hours, the VC element attempted to withdraw. Groups began moving back toward the tree line they'd emerged from. Henderson pursued. "Torres, don't let them break contact. Kill as many as possible before they reach cover." Torres engaged the withdrawing groups with continuous fire. The miniguns buzzed without pause, dumping rounds into the fleeing personnel. Bodies littered the ground. By the time survivors reached the tree line, Henderson estimated at least 35 had been killed. Perhaps 15 escaped into the jungle. Henderson checked ammunition. Right minigun, 200 rounds. Left minigun, 600 rounds. Total, 800 rounds remaining, 2 minutes of ammunition. He radioed Sabre. "Sabre, Warhorse 2-6, we engaged second enemy element approaching the crossing site. Estimate 35 additional enemy KIA. We are now critically low on ammunition. 800 rounds remaining. Request rearm or relief." Sabre responded, "Warhorse 2-6, no rearm assets available at your location. Nearest rearm point is Firebase Delta, 40 miles northeast. Estimated flight time 25 minutes. Do you want to RTB for rearm?" Henderson considered. The flight to Firebase Delta and back would take 50 minutes total. During that time, VC forces could resume crossing operations. But with only 800 rounds remaining, he couldn't effectively engage another large force. He checked the battlefield. No movement visible. No thermal signatures on the starlight scope. The area appeared clear. He made the decision. "Sabre, negative on RTB. We'll hold position and monitor with remaining ammunition. If another element approaches, we'll engage with available rounds, then RTB." Torres looked at Henderson. "Sir, 800 rounds won't stop another battalion-sized element." "It'll stop enough of them, and the psychological effect of the helicopter still being here will deter them. If they think we're out of ammunition, they'll try again. As long as we're orbiting and they don't know our status, they'll assume we can still kill them." At 23:01 hours, Torres detected more movement. "Pilot, thermal signatures southeast of the crossing site. Large group. Estimate 80+ individuals moving toward the river." Henderson descended and positioned for observation. The new element was moving cautiously, stopping frequently, using cover, advancing in bounds. They had learned from the previous group's destruction. They knew a helicopter was present. They were trying to reach the river while minimizing exposure. Henderson had 800 rounds. Against 80 individuals, that was 10 rounds per person if every round hit. Unlikely. He would need to make every burst count. He engaged at 23:03 hours. Torres fired short 3-second bursts at the advancing groups. Each burst killed 2 to 3 individuals. The VC element stopped and returned fire. Henderson continued orbiting and Torres continued firing. The minigun ammunition counter dropped rapidly. 800, 600, 400, 200. At 23:06 hours, both miniguns went silent. Winchester, 0 rounds remaining. Henderson climbed to 3,000 feet. The VC forces below noticed the fire had stopped. After 30 seconds, they began advancing again, moving toward the river in larger groups. They knew the helicopter was out of ammunition. Henderson radioed Sabre. "Sabre, Warhorse 2-6 is Winchester. All ammunition expended. Enemy forces are resuming movement toward the river. We engaged 3 separate elements over 50 minutes. Estimate 270+ enemy KIA confirmed. We are RTB to Firebase Delta for rearm." Sabre responded, "Warhorse 2-6, copy Winchester. We're scrambling additional gunships to cover that crossing site. ETA 20 minutes. RTB for rearm. Outstanding work. That's the highest single aircraft enemy KIA I've ever heard." Henderson turned northeast toward Firebase Delta. The flight took 23 minutes. He landed at 23:31 hours. Ground crews immediately began rearming, loading fresh minigun ammunition pods and new rocket pods. While the helicopter was being rearmed, Henderson and Torres were debriefed by the Firebase intelligence officer. Henderson estimated total enemy casualties, 270 to 280 killed, possibly 50 to 100 wounded. 3 separate enemy elements engaged. 1 battalion strength crossing completely stopped. 2 reinforcement elements decimated. The intelligence officer asked for verification. "Captain, you're claiming 270+ enemy killed by 1 helicopter?" "Confirmed. We had direct visual on all casualties. Bodies in the water, bodies on both riverbanks, bodies in the approach areas. The count is conservative. Actual number might be higher. The intelligence officer made notes. We'll send reconnaissance to verify at first light. If your count is accurate, this is the most successful single gunship mission of the war. Henderson was too tired to care about records. He had been flying and fighting for over an hour. His hands ached from holding the controls through continuous orbits. His eyes burned from staring through the starlight scope. He wanted coffee and a cigarette. Rearming was completed at 23:49 hours. Sabre radioed with updated tasking. Warhorse 26, additional gunships are now on station at the river crossing. Enemy activity has ceased in that area. We have new tasking for you. Intelligence reports enemy forces massing 8 miles south of your previous engagement area. Grid Whiskey Delta 6821. Proceed to that location and investigate. Henderson acknowledged. He took off at 23:52 hours and flew south. Torres monitored the starlight scope. At 0007 hours on March 15th, Torres detected movement at the new grid coordinates. Pilot, I have thermal signatures at Whiskey Delta 6821. Large concentration. Estimate 150-plus individuals in an assembly area. Henderson examined the scope. The signatures showed personnel clustered in groups, not moving, just assembled. Probably another element preparing for operations, perhaps the reserve force for the river crossing that had been delayed or held back. Henderson checked fuel. He had 90 minutes remaining on station. He had full ammunition, 8,000 minigun rounds and 14 rockets. He established orbit at 2,000 feet and prepared to engage. At 0009 hours, Torres fired the first rocket into the assembly area. The explosion scattered one group. He fired the remaining 13 rockets systematically, targeting each cluster of personnel. The explosions created chaos. Personnel ran in multiple directions. Some fled into the jungle. Some took cover in vegetation. Some attempted to set up defensive positions. Henderson engaged with miniguns. Torres fired sustained bursts into the fleeing groups and defensive positions. The assembly area became a killing ground. Bodies dropped everywhere. Return fire was sporadic and ineffective. Most VC didn't have clear shots at the helicopter, and those who did were shooting at a moving target 2,000 feet above them. The engagement lasted 18 minutes. At 0027 hours, Henderson ceased fire. No movement visible in the assembly area. Torres counted bodies using the starlight scope thermal imaging. Heat signatures from corpses were still visible. Count 120-plus bodies. Perhaps 30 individuals had escaped into the jungle. Henderson radioed Sabre. Sabre, Warhorse 26, we engaged enemy assembly area at Whiskey Delta 6821. Estimate 120-plus enemy KIA. Area is clear. Request additional tasking or RTB. Sabre responded, Warhorse 26, negative on additional tasking. RTB to base. Mission complete. Total enemy KIA for tonight's operations, 390-plus. Confirm that number. Henderson calculated. First river crossing, 200-plus. Second and third elements, 70-plus. Assembly area, 120-plus. Total, 390-plus. Sabre, confirmed. 390-plus enemy KIA. Sabre paused. Warhorse 26, that's an entire enemy battalion. You destroyed an entire enemy battalion in one night with one helicopter. Henderson didn't respond. He turned northwest toward base, a 40-minute flight. He landed at 0112 hours on March 15th. He had been flying for nearly 4 hours. He had engaged enemy forces at 4 separate locations. He had fired 16,800 rounds of minigun ammunition and 28 rockets. He had killed nearly 400 enemy personnel. Ground crews inspected the helicopter. 7 bullet holes in the fuselage, 2 in the tail boom, 3 in the engine cowling. None had hit critical systems. The helicopter could fly again after patching. Henderson was debriefed at 0147 hours by the battalion intelligence officer, a major who seemed skeptical of the casualty claims. "Captain, walk me through the entire mission. I need to understand how one helicopter killed 390 enemy personnel." Henderson described each engagement in detail: the river crossing, the reinforcement elements, the assembly area. He emphasized that the casualties resulted from sustained operations over nearly 4 hours, not a single engagement. He noted that the VC had attempted to continue operations despite heavy casualties, which increased their losses. The major asked about verification. "How do we know the count is accurate? Did you physically count bodies?" "We had direct visual through starlight scope thermal imaging. Every casualty showed heat signature. We counted signatures after each engagement. The counts are conservative. Actual casualties, including wounded who died later, are probably higher." The major made notes. "We'll send reconnaissance teams to all 4 engagement sites at first light. If your counts are verified, this mission will be documented as the most effective single helicopter engagement of the war." Henderson was recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Torres was recommended for the Silver Star. The recommendations noted, "Captain Henderson and Lieutenant Torres conducted sustained combat operations over 4 hours, engaging multiple enemy elements totaling over 600 personnel. Their actions resulted in confirmed destruction of 1 enemy battalion and prevention of major enemy operations. They displayed exceptional skill, courage, and determination." At 0630 hours, 6 hours after Henderson landed, reconnaissance teams reached the first river crossing site. They counted bodies and photographed the scene. Initial count: 187 bodies visible in and around the river. Blood trails and drag marks indicated many wounded had been evacuated. Estimated total casualties: 230 to 250. The reconnaissance team radioed their findings to battalion headquarters. The intelligence officer updated Henderson's casualty count, revising it upward from 200 to 230 for the first engagement. Reconnaissance teams reached the other engagement sites throughout the morning. Final verified counts: river crossing, 230 killed. Second element, 38 killed. Third element, 41 killed. Assembly area, 118 killed. Total verified, 427 killed. Henderson's estimate had been conservative. The actual count was 37 higher than reported. Battalion headquarters issued a press release on March 16 describing the engagement. The release stated, "On the 14th-15th March 1967, a UH-1C gunship crew engaged multiple enemy elements in the Mekong Delta, destroying over 400 enemy personnel in sustained operations lasting 4 hours. This represents the highest single aircraft enemy casualty count in the Vietnam War to date." The story was picked up by military newspapers and eventually civilian press. Henderson gave one interview to Stars and Stripes. He downplayed his role and emphasized that the results came from being in the right place with full ammunition and fuel for extended operations. The Viet Cong response came through captured documents and prisoner interrogations. A VC after-action report dated March 20th described the engagement. On 14 March, the 274th Regiment attempted to cross Song Tra Ving River to reinforce operations in Kien Hoa Province. The crossing was engaged by American helicopter gunship using heavy automatic weapons. The helicopter maintained continuous fire for over 1 hour. All 3 battalion crossing attempts were defeated. Casualties: 1st Battalion, 230 killed. 2nd Battalion, 79 killed. 3rd Battalion, Assembly Area, 118 killed. Total: 427 killed, 150 plus wounded. The regiment is combat ineffective and requires reconstitution. The document confirmed Henderson's casualty counts and revealed the strategic impact. An entire VC regiment, 3 battalions, had been destroyed by 1 helicopter. The regiment required months to rebuild and never fully recovered its combat effectiveness. The tactical lessons were documented in an Army Aviation Bulletin issued in April 1967. Recent operations demonstrate that armed helicopters are highly effective against massed enemy personnel, particularly during river crossings and assembly operations. Key factors in successful engagement: sustained fire using minigun systems, exploitation of enemy concentration in confined areas, willingness to remain on target despite return fire, and coordination with intelligence for follow-on targeting. The bulletin specifically cited Henderson's mission as a model for aggressive gunship employment. Henderson continued flying combat missions through December 1967. He completed 340 combat hours and was credited with over 600 enemy casualties total. He survived the war and remained in the Army, eventually retiring as a colonel in 1989. In a 1995 interview, Henderson was asked about the March 14th mission. He said, "The Viet Cong called helicopters insects, small, annoying, insignificant. On March 14th, they learned that insects can kill. We weren't insignificant, we were lethal. 1 Huey gunship with the right weapons and enough ammunition can destroy a battalion if the enemy makes the mistake of massing in the open." This assessment captured the mission's significance. The VC had attempted large-scale operations, river crossing and reinforcement movements using massed formations. They believed helicopters lacked the firepower to stop battalion-strength elements. Henderson proved otherwise. 1 Huey gunship with miniguns and persistence destroyed over 400 personnel because the enemy concentrated instead of dispersing. The psychological impact extended beyond the 274th Regiment. VC units throughout the Mekong Delta modified their tactics after March 14th. River crossings were conducted in smaller groups over multiple nights. Assembly areas were dispersed and concealed. Movement was slower and more cautious. The operational tempo decreased because units feared helicopter engagement. American forces noted the change. An intelligence summary from April 1967 stated, "Enemy activity in the Mekong Delta has decreased 40% since mid-March. Captured prisoners report widespread fear of helicopter gunships following the 14 March engagement. Enemy units are avoiding large-scale operations and concentrating on small unit actions, less vulnerable to air attack." 1 helicopter mission influenced enemy operational planning across an entire region. James Henderson died in 2019 at age 79. His obituary noted his distinguished flying cross and his role in one of the most successful helicopter combat missions in military history. The obituary quoted Henderson's final interview in 2017. "We proved that helicopters weren't just transports. We proved they could fight. We proved that dismissing new weapons because they look wrong or operate differently is a mistake. The VC learned that lesson 1 casualty at a time, over 400 casualties in 1 night. The UH-1 Huey gunship evolved into specialized attack helicopters, the AH-1 Cobra, and eventually the AH-64 Apache. But the fundamental concept remained. A rotary wing aircraft with heavy automatic weapons could dominate the battlefield against massed personnel. Henderson's mission validated that concept through overwhelming results. On March 14, 1967, the insects killed 427 times. The transport helicopter that couldn't fight destroyed an entire regiment. The weapon the Viet Cong dismissed proved that mockery dies when the miniguns start firing. 427 casualties, 4 hours of sustained combat, one Huey gunship circling in the darkness, raining down 16,800 rounds from weapons that turned night into day, flown by a crew that refused to leave until the ammunition was gone. Sometimes, the insect is the apex predator.